Welcome to a special edition of the Peter King Podcast. Very, very happy to be joined on this mock draft podcast by Paul Burmeister of NBC Sports, a good friend of mine. We just figured that since Paul is a draft junkie, as am I, it would be good to have two guys to bounce stuff off each other during the course of this podcast. For those of you who'd like to see this on video, we're recording it on a Zoom video conference. You can find it at NBCSports.com, or you can just hear it anywhere you normally get your podcast, which, because you're listening to it as a podcast right now, you probably already know. So anyway, Paul, welcome, and really glad to have you here talking about the draft.
Peter, super excited to be a part of this with you. I've read your mock drafts forever, so this will be fun conversation. First question that comes to mind for me before we dive into the picks: 9 o'clock last night, feet up on the couch watching the Bulls documentary, or were you still tying up the loose ends with this mock?
You know, I didn't see any of the Jordan documentary. I didn't see any TV, in fact, at all. I wanted to get done, and in fact, I wanted to be able to send you this last night, but I ended up fooling around with it until shortly after 11 o'clock. And it always happens that way, though. I can tell you, there have been times when I've still been sort of fiddling with it at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm trying to be a little bit more sane. But, Paul, the other thing is there is just so much going on right now in and around the NFL. In my opinion, having a draft with every general manager is sitting at his dining room table or his basement with scouts everywhere all over the country. I did something in my column that I thought was really cool this week. I identified where all of the key members, all of the key decision makers in the New York Giants front office were going to be on draft night. And I had a map of the United States, and I just put that map of the United States up and put, the pins on all the places. Jason Garrett in Dallas, Patrick, I'm blanking, but Chris Mara, one of their chief scouts in South Florida. Where is Joe Judge going to be on draft night? So those are the kind of things that I think at this time of year, in this year, just make this such an unusual draft season.
You say there's so much going on. Is that so much trade speculation, so much evaluation that's still happening because they couldn't put their hands on the prospects?
No, what I mean is that, like, for instance, I'm fascinated about one thing that is really more technical than football. How is ESPN with 7 people in the control room on Thursday in round 1 of this draft and over 150 feeds coming in from every general manager, every head coach, 58 players? How in the world are they going to funnel that into a telecast? So I got into that a little bit. I got into the fact that, this year, the first person you're going to see on the draft telecast is Peyton Manning. He's going to do a 2.5-minute piece voicing over, praising all the healthcare workers, all the people on the front lines, and then sort of ending it with a little bit of hope. And so those are the kind of things. I talked to Roger Goodell. Is more, normally, Paul, in a weekend like this, it's trying to get as many football people on the phone as possible. But I talked to, for a half hour the other day, the ESPN ratings expert, the person who works for ESPN and does ratings trends, about this draft could have the rating of an NFL playoff game. And so all of those things, to me, they're all very interesting. And so you add that to trying to figure out who's going to pick who where, and it became a busy last 3 or 4 days.
You just added a whole lot of pressure to that control room for ESPN. That's bare bone, but knowing those kind of numbers that are going to be out there on Thursday night. Yeah. Okay. So as I said, Peter, we're going to break this down into quadrants of 4. We'll take a look at 4, and obviously that means 8 different times we'll roll out the stories. So 1 through 4. I'll read each one of the picks for everybody listening on a podcast. And then I'll just take you right to the biggest headline in that grouping. And before we get out of that group of 4, we'll make sure we touch on each one of the teams. So we'll get right at it. 1 through 4, and no real surprises at the top. And this is typical with a lot of the mocks. Number 1, Bengals, Joe Burrow, quarterback, LSU. Number 2, Redskins, Chase Young, defensive end, Ohio State. Then the big news comes right here, and I love that you put this in. At 3, a trade between the Lions and the Dolphins. The Dolphins moving up to 3 to go quarterback Justin Herbert, not Tua Tagovailoa. At 4, the Giants' offensive line, Tristan Wirfs, Iowa. So the Dolphins and the Lions working this trade. Take me behind the scenes at the Peter King Mock Central here. And this conclusion.
Here's sort of the way I look at it. All right. So Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, basically has been telling the people in his organization, we need our generation's Dan Marino. We have to get our quarterback. And I think we can all look at this and we can say, hey, wait a second. The Dolphins don't have to trade up to get Justin Herbert. They're ahead of the Chargers right now. Maybe the Chargers take them, but they're already ahead of the Chargers. Why do they have to trade up? Well, to just make sure that either the Chargers or nobody else trade up ahead of them to get the quarterback who they want. Now, Paul, I can tell you this right now. I don't know for a fact it's going to be Justin Herbert. It might be Tua Tagovailoa. But they're going to take a quarterback here, unless I'm sadly mistaken, and about 13 NFL general managers are too. But they're going to take a quarterback here. And in my opinion, especially when you have 6 picks in the top 70, if you want to make absolutely sure that you get your guy, then it's not too high a price to take the 39th overall pick in the draft, which you already own. You own this draft, and pay that as insurance that you're going to be able to get the quarterback you want at number 3.
You mentioned in the Football Morning in America article this morning that you thought Justin Herbert would be seen as a safer pick than Tua Tagovailoa because of his injuries and the team's lack of ability to really, like I said, get their hands on him the last month. Do you get the feeling around the league, no matter when and where they go, that Justin Herbert is viewed as the better pick after Joe Burrow at quarterback?
Well, I think probably the majority of teams in the league, if they had to draft someone today to be their long-term answer at quarterback, I don't know how many, but I think the majority would pick Justin Herbert. That isn't to say there aren't a lot of teams that would pick Tua Tagovailoa, because I believe a lot of teams would. Miami might. I might be wrong. But I do think that there is some hesitancy to pick a guy who's had a broken hand, 2 high ankle sprains that required surgery, and obviously the major dislocated hip. And the 2 ankle injuries and the hip injury happened in a 13-month span. But I quoted an NFL team physician in the column basically saying, in this a team that is not drafting a quarterback. But he's at the combine and he does his due diligence on all the players because you never know. And he found that if it were up to him and he had to make a recommendation, he'd probably say that he thought Tagovailoa is okay. And as in his words, that, this could be an issue when he's 35, hip issues, but I don't think it's going to be an issue when he's 25.
But the uncertainty that's out there with his injury could definitely affect the trade market in the top 5, in the top 10 on Thursday night.
Absolutely, because, I don't think there are teams that in a norm, if Tua had never had the hip injury, he was going to be 1 and 1A in some way with Joe Burrow to be the first pick in the draft. So because he's not the first pick in the draft, and because the injury has put him significantly below Burrow, you have to ask yourself at this point, what in the world are you willing to pay to take a risk like that? And although I have him sliding in this draft and a team trading up to get him in this draft, the market is nowhere near what it would have been, had he never had the hip injury.
Thinking of quarterbacks, thinking of trades, and wondering about the market for such a thing, Peter, in the top here. Let's go to Cincinnati at 1 with Joe Burrow. That would be no surprise if it happened that way. My number one question there, my number one thought, is there a trade market to get up to 1? And do you think the Bengals would be open to a trade?
I don't think so. My understanding is that they have decided that they're taking Burrow. They have been, talking to him already. I don't know that he has the playbook or anything like that, but I think the impression I get is that their conversations with him have been not if we pick you, but when we pick you.
Right. Top thought that comes to mind here: Redskins taking Chase Young, a defensive end at Ohio State.
Here's the thing about Chase Young. I think Washington was really trying to create a market back in February for the number 2 pick in the draft because, why not? Why wouldn't you do that? So they were saying, okay, we're spending a lot of time evaluating Tua and Herbert, and we're spending time with them and all this other stuff. But all of that just flew out the window when they traded for Kyle Allen. When they traded that 5th-round pick for Kyle Allen, now you know that they expect that Kyle Allen either will be the starter opening day for them or he will provide stiff competition for Dwayne Haskins, and Washington would go in a different direction. So I don't think there's much doubt. Nobody in the league thinks that there's any doubt. I don't think there's much doubt that Washington will take Chase Young.
Skipping ahead to the Giants at 4, what led you to Dave Gettleman selecting Tristan Wirfs, offensive tackle, Iowa?
Mainly his words. He has talked all along about how they have to be better on the offensive line. They have a gaping hole at right tackle. They don't have one. I mean, they signed Cam Fleming from the Cowboys, but he's basically been a career backup. And Wirfs is a walk-in day 1 right tackle. So my gut feeling is, and I don't know which tackle they're going to take. I basically asked, I'd say 12 people, just gut feeling, who do you think they'll take? And Wirfs won. Wirfs won. And that if Andrew Thomas had won, I would have probably put Andrew Thomas there. But there's a lot of people who think that Wirfs basically checks all the boxes for Dave Gettleman.
I thought you brought up a very good point in your article this morning. You said if I talk to 25 general managers, I think I get 25 different lists of top 5 offensive tackles, and all 5, no matter what order they go, are likely going to go at some point in that first round.
I mean, look, in my opinion, if you put, there's a bunch of people right now who really like Josh Jones of Houston. He's not listed with all the rest of those guys, with the lead 4. But one of the reasons I find Josh Jones, and we'll talk about him a little bit later in the round, one of the reasons I really find Josh Jones a very interesting player is basically because he has really got some great experience, at tackle. So to me, I think he probably belongs, somewhere certainly lower in the round, and probably will go lower in the round. But there's a bunch of tackles that teams ended up liking once they started investigating them.
And I've got the answers to the test here. There will be more than 5 in the Peter King mock here going in round 1. Let's get to the next 4 here, and that's 5, 6, 7, and 8. And because of the trade that took place at number 3 with Detroit and Miami, at number 5, we have the Lions taking the cornerback from Ohio State, Jeff Okudah. At 6, and here's the major story here, the Chargers, with Justin Herbert off the board and Tua Tagovailoa available, they go offensive line, Andrew Thomas, Georgia. Panthers at 7, D-line, Derek Brown from Auburn, and the Cardinals at number 8, Mr. Everything on the front 7, or maybe even the entire 11 on defense in this draft, Isaiah Simmons, defensive player, Clemson. Let's go to the Chargers at 6. Why offensive tackle instead of quarterback when Tua's there?
I think there's 2 reasons for this. And again, they might take Tua. But most people who I spoke with believe that because the head coach of the Chargers, Anthony Lynn, is a big Tyrod Taylor supporter, believes that he might not just be a bridge to the next quarterback. And also because, this team has major, major tackle issues. Brian Bulaga comes in, is probably going to play right tackle for them. He's missed, I think 13 games in the last 3 years due to injury, 31 years old. So he's a stopgap. And so we'll see what happens beyond this. But they desperately need a tackle. And if they're able to get I think Andrew Thomas is probably the cleanest tackle in this draft. And, if you are first-team All-American and you're playing in the SEC against the greatest athletes week in and week out in college football, and you've been a 2-year starter at left tackle and played at a very high level, that is a guy that, to me, look, the Browns absolutely love Andrew Thomas. And this is a football decision, okay? This is not a marketing decision. I'm sure if Tom Telesco, the GM of the Chargers, went to Dean Spanos, the owner, and said, I want to take Tua, he'd be happy. The fans would embrace that. But I think this is more of a football decision. And again, look, Paul, I am basing what I do based on the beliefs right now, currently, of the majority of people who I speak to. And I try to speak to people, not only, look, I talk to Tom Telesco. I don't often ask a team, who should I give you? Because, why would they tell me? It's just, it's not what they do. But I've talked to a lot of people who know Tom Telesco. He's a very admired GM in the league. And I just get the feeling that, most people believe he's going to play it safer here.
If he plays it safe also throughout the early picks in this draft, Peter, and they do not take their quarterback in the future, just your opinion here, not other GMs, look ahead to the fall. However the season plays out, the Chargers with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, top half of the AFC West team or bottom half of that division?
So Kansas City's number one, and now we have to figure out who's number two. The Chargers absolutely unequivocally could be number two in that division, but only if Tyrod Taylor is somewhere in the, say, 10 to 16 range of quarterbacks. And so to me, that's asking a lot of Tyrod Taylor. He's going to have to play probably better than most of us think that he is. But I look at this and I say, the way that the Chargers want to play football is going to be improved this year by taking Andrew Thomas.
Moving ahead to number 7, the Panthers. You have them with Derek Brown, defensive tackle, Auburn. Makes a lot of sense. But I'm wondering, in this scenario, if Tua Tagovailoa is available for Carolina, I know they signed Teddy Bridgewater. Do you think they would flinch? Do you think they would hesitate and maybe take Tua?
I think they might take Tua. But, Paul, I'll tell you the reason I didn't do it, okay? When Matt Rule went into Carolina, he looked at his roster, and he has holes all over his defense. And to me, I look at Carolina's defense, and Matt Rule comes in, with 3 or 4 coaches who I think are going to totally remake, including Joe Brady, including Phil Snow, the defensive coordinator he brought from Baylor. They're going to remake their team in their image. So although I think they would be fascinated to have Tua Tagovailoa, in the quarterback room, I also raise the very real specter that if you draft Tua, in this draft, you do not get an impact defensive player, and you're going to have a bottom 5 defense in this league. Okay, so that's 1. Okay, how about 2? If you decide that you're going to take Tua, then next year, would you really keep Teddy Bridgewater around at a huge number And if you don't keep him at his huge number, would you be willing to cut him or trade him and take a $20 million cap hit? So, they committed to give Teddy Bridgewater a chance. And I think that's what it comes down to. The bigger question, quite honestly, might be, would they take Derrick Brown or Isaiah Simmons here? And that gave me a lot of pause, because I can tell you it basically was split right down the middle between Brown and Simmons. And I wouldn't be surprised if they took either guy.
It would make a lot of sense there. If they think of him as a linebacker, I mean, Luke Kuechly has been the face of that defense for 7 or 8 years. You gave me a very nice segue, because at number 8, Arizona Cardinals, the team that gave up the most yards in the NFL last year, you have them with Isaiah Simmons. And what I like here, he's the only player, Peter, on your list in this mock, 32 picks. He has no position. You just listed defense.
Yeah, and look, he played 5 different spots in his last year at Clemson. And you think about that for a minute, you say, wow, that's a really versatile player. But, there are teams in the NFL that really struggle with saying, okay, is he an every down linebacker? Does he play strong safety, let's say, on first down, and on any passing down, does he move down into the box? I mean, really, it's kind of interesting. Todd Bowles started doing this in Arizona when he was defensive coordinator there out of need, with guys like Deion Buchanan and Tyrann Mathieu and others. But he had an urgent need at linebacker, and that's why he did it. So I think now, if you take Isaiah Simmons, you have to be willing to say, let's let his ability, his skill, and let's let, his play decide his position. So I think if Arizona picks him, they're almost going back to the future with what they used to have a couple of defensive coordinators ago with Todd Bowles.
I had that written down right here. 2013, Tyrann Mathieu, same kind of questions. Love the player, wonder what he's going to play, and they certainly found a number of homes for him on that defense. Back up to number 5. It's the Lions picking instead of the Dolphins, because you had that trade at 5 and 3. What do you like about the fit, Jeff Okudah, cornerback, Ohio State?
In my opinion, if GM Bob Quinn can move down to 5 and pick up a second-round pick to do so, it's a tremendous deal for him, because, look, the Lions come in, they have a lot of needs. But the Lions, I think, have 3 very specific needs. I think they need a long-term guard, they need an upgrade at running back, and they need a corner. They need 2 pieces in the defensive backfield, but they've got to replace Darius Slay. Making this trade, if they're able to make it, would allow the Lions to get the best corner, the best guard, and one of the best 3 running backs, whoever that may be. I happen to think that Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin would be perfect for them, but who knows? They might take the LSU back or the Ohio State back, or even DeAndre Swift of Georgia. But I think that making this trade, if they can, allows them to fill 3 holes instead of 2.
8 picks in. Let's move on now to the next group of 4, 9 through 12. And right away, you're going to notice a Tua Tagovailoa who hasn't been selected yet as we go 9 through 12. His name is still out there. So Jaguars cornerback C.J. Henderson, Florida. Browns offensive line, Jedrick Wills from Alabama. 11, the Jets go Mekhi Becton, another offensive tackle, massive player out of Louisville. And the first of 2 first-round picks for the Raiders, CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, Oklahoma. So I guess, first of all, the fact that Tua is not on here, to me, is the headline.
I mean, and look, the Raiders absolutely could pick him. I don't think they want to have that choice to make, quite honestly, because they have very definitive designs what they'd like to do. They'd like to get a franchise receiver and a great cornerback in this draft. I think there are only 2 really, really good corners in this draft, C.J. Henderson and Jeff Okudah. And I think one of the reasons why I go corner to Jacksonville is that even though Jacksonville has needs all over the defense, and they might need a quarterback too. The reason I did this is that I think he's the best single player at a position of grave need for the Jaguars. once they let Jalen Ramsey out the door, they then had to determine what are we going to do in our defensive backfield. And in my opinion, if they're facing having C.J. Henderson on the board or going down to their second pick of the first round, and then it's almost like a lottery with all the other corners, many of whom are good, but none of them are as good in cover ability as C.J. Henderson is. So it just makes the most sense to me.
It's incredible that we can say about the Jaguars cornerback is a position of grave need. I think 2 years ago, and the reason the Jags are on the map is because they had the best corner duo in the league. Now they don't have either one.
Yeah, and look, we could do an entire show on what in the world has happened to the Jacksonville Jaguars. 2+ years ago, or 3+ years ago, whatever it is, they're in the AFC Championship game with a double-digit lead in Foxborough in the fourth quarter. And, so what happened? Every single guy on their defense from that era, with the exception of Miles Jack, every great player is gone. Every one. And you have to ask yourself at some point, well, then why is the head coach and why is the general manager, why are they still here if all these guys are gone? What happened? But, Shad Khan, being a patient man, has decided to give both Dave Caldwell and Doug Marrone one more year to start the rebuild. We'll see if it works. Gardner Minshew is going to have to play well, I think, for both those guys to be in these jobs a year from now. But we'll see.
Same front office that took Blake Bortles as well, by the way, in the first round. Okay, so Jacksonville goes cornerback at 9. At 10, Cleveland with offensive tackle Jedrick Wills out of Alabama. So this is clearly a priority for them because in free agency, Jack Conklin one side, and this would take care of a big need on the other side.
I kind of looked at this like Cleveland, I think, would be very disappointed to not get Andrew Thomas. And so that's why I think there's a decent chance Cleveland dumps out of this pick if anybody wants to move up to get it. But failing that, they take a deep breath and take a tackle who everybody likes, but I don't think anybody likes him as well at left tackle as Andrew Thomas.
Speaking of tackles, Jets at 11. You have them, I think this is with the fourth best tackle in the draft, Mekhi Becton, Louisville. I'm wondering, how about receiver? All the receivers are still on the board. They could have their favorite one. How tough was that call for you?
Well, you look at it this way. Later in my column, this took me probably 6 hours to do one day last week. But I took the last 4 drafts, Paul, and I wrote down every wide receiver who was taken in the first round. There have been 11. And I looked at every wide receiver who had been taken in the second round. There were 19. I averaged out the season for both groups, for the 11 wide receivers in the first round. I averaged out the numbers in an average season for them, and then averaged out the numbers in an average season for the second rounders. The second rounders had 20 more catches on average per season than the first rounders. And my whole point is, look, Jerry Jeudy might be great, and obviously CeeDee Lamb, a complete receiver. Henry Ruggs, 4.28 speed. They're all really great prospects, don't get me wrong. But do you know how many great prospects in the second and third round there will be? Starters, wide receiver starters for the next 6 or 8 years who will be picked in the second and third round. I don't know that you can say the same thing about the second wave of tackles. And although I'm sure that Joe Douglas is strongly going to consider, if he has every wide receiver on the board, he'd strongly consider CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy. There's no question about it. But I just look at their team right now, and I just say, they better build from the inside out. If I've got a young quarterback, I think he's 23 years old, Sam Darnold, and I need help all over the offense, but particularly on the offensive line, there would have to be a massive difference in grade for me not to take a tackle here.
That pick there at 11, Peter, I think speaks very well to two of the strengths or two of the major stories in this draft offensively. The depth at wide receiver and what you can get in the second and third round, not only with the strength of this class, but what you pointed out with the history of those second rounders, and the drop off once you get past the what you call the first wave of offensive tackles is pretty big there, late first round into the second. So I like your reasoning there a lot. Even with that in mind, though, the Raiders at 12, they can't resist CeeDee Lamb, their top wide receiver, huh?
I had heard a couple of things. Mayock's had dinner with CeeDee Lamb at some point after the college season, loves him, thinks he's the most complete receiver in the crop, and that and look, who knows? Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Both Mike Mayock and John Gruden really like Marcus Mariota. You go back to when Gruden was doing the quarterback school and bringing all the quarterbacks down to Tampa to sit with him and talk football. He loves Marcus Mariota's tools. So, who knows? It might make sense for them to take Tua here, but everybody who knows those guys well believe that they're going to take a receiver right here.
And the one term that everybody used that I talked to about CeeDee Lamb was how competitive he is when the ball's in the air once he gets it. And there's not a value that Mike Mayock or trait that Mike values more than how a player competes. Yeah, so I think he will like him quite a bit. Okay, the headline. We've had some good ones so far, Peter, but the top story so far, we get into the next group of four, starts at 13. You have a trade between the 49ers and the Patriots, and boom, there it is. Marquee team trading up to get the quarterback of the future, Tua Tagovailoa. Buccaneers, first pick of the Brady era. They go defensive line, Javon Kinlaw. Broncos fans love this pick, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver, Alabama. And the Falcons, Kayvon Chaisson, edge rusher out of LSU. Okay, so the Patriots trading up to get Tua Tagovailoa. Intel here, Peter, or more of a hunch?
No, just a hunch. In my opinion, and look, nobody ever knows what Bill Belichick is going to do. I know an old scout who a long time ago worked for the Patriots, and he said there was one time, and I forget what year it was, but they were taking they were looking at sort of linebackers / pass rushers, and they ended up taking that cornerback from Virginia. I forget who it was. And he ended up being hurt. He never was any good in the NFL.
I think
Rossai Dowling. And everybody thought they were going to pick somebody else. Like everybody thought. And when that pick came up, all the scouts just sort of looked at each other and said, where did that come from? But that's how Bill Belichick operates. This is my opinion. I do not know Bill well. I mean, I do, but I really don't have any personal relationship with him now. But to me, he works on a need-to-know basis. If he needs to bring in his Northeast scout and this guy and everything to say, okay, here's what we're doing, here's what we're taking. I mean, he doesn't need to do that. All he needs to do is to look around the room and say, hey, guys, what do you think of this? Okay. And he doesn't say, well, I like this or I don't like it. But I think that is the way Belichick operates, and it served him very well. So I think probably the only ones who know if Bill Belichick sitting there at 23, if he saw Tua Tagovailoa sinking like a stone in this draft, would he rescue him from becoming Aaron Rodgers in 2005? Or would he just sit there and say, hey, maybe he'll fall to us? Or I don't really want to use my one on a quarterback. Because obviously if they trade and they move up, it's going to cost them more than just this year's one. I have it being this year's one and next year's one to move up these 10 spots to get to it. Now, look, I did this because it's a hunch, it's a guess. I know how he feels about Nick Saban, and I know how Nick Saban feels about this player. He absolutely loves him, has been singing his praises to anyone who will listen. And in my opinion, he's going to tell Bill, his hip is fine. He's going to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL for a long time. Look, if that happens, why wouldn't the Patriots do that? So that's kind of why I did this.
It's easy to play the other side of the coin here, Peter. And one way to look at it, considering the number of needs this team all of a sudden has on both sides of the football, and the fact that Bill Belichick has won with a number of quarterbacks not drafted in the first round, not named Tom Brady, would you applaud this pick of a quarterback in round one, or would you question it more?
I'd applaud it because, look, the Patriots, who knows? The Patriots could go 2-14 this year and be in position to take Trevor Lawrence next year. So, but I sincerely doubt that's going to happen. The Patriots probably very, very rarely are going to be in position to get a franchise-type quarterback. Paul, that's why I did this. I'm not saying it's going to happen.
Sure.
I just think that if everything falls right for New England, that this pick makes a lot of sense for him.
Mock drafts to me, Peter, are not so much about whether you get the pick right. It's the reasoning. It's the couple minutes of conversation after it. I think you bring up very good points about the Patriots maybe trading up to 13 with the Niners, and in the scenario of taking Tua Tagovailoa. You're also playing producer for me here because you segue right into the Buccaneers at 14, Tom Brady's new team. And with the first pick of that era, Javon Kinlaw, defensive tackle. How much thought did you give to going offense to give Brady a new weapon there?
I really thought a lot of giving him a running back who can catch, like DeAndre Swift. Because, look, I think one thing that Tom Brady is going to need, okay, he's going to need a running back who can be a good safety valve for him. Just like, Cameron Brate has no idea how many balls he's going to catch now or how many times that Brady is going to look at him in this offense. So I really thought of doing that. But at the end of the day, I just thought the value of Kinlaw here was so good. And the other positions, look, they're passing up Jerry Jeudy. But I couldn't in good conscience add a receiver with some of the defensive needs, and especially some of the age on Tampa's defensive front. I just think they need a good young, franchise player to build around.
Thinking of Jerry Jeudy, I think you made John Elway the happiest GM in the draft there at 15. Didn't even have to trade up to get the wide receiver out of Alabama. So this pick itself is fun. I think when you look at the total group of young offensive weapons there with the Broncos and what they did, especially late in the season last year, I really like what they're building there at 15.
I do too. I think Denver is a very, very interesting team. The point I made is, imagine if they get Jeudy. Then they've got who they think right now would be their two long-term receivers, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, a young running back who has been a 1,000-yard rusher his first 2 years in the NFL, and a young quarterback who they're not sure is going to be their franchise guy, but they're going to give him every chance to be that. None of these guys is 26 years old yet. So if this happens for John Elway, I think he'd be the happiest GM in the NFL.
Without a doubt. And I think it's always fun this time of year to connect the dots. Of course, the player is good, and the team needs that spot. But you go back to last December, and you talk about Drew Lock. He won 4 of his 5 starts. But the one loss he had was against the best team in the league. And the best team in that division, Kansas City, they didn't score a touchdown in that game. So, I'm wondering as well, okay, if you're John Elway, you look at that game, we didn't fire a shot against the best team. So wide receiver, maybe we can score a couple touchdowns against the Chiefs now if we have this kind of weapon on offense.
Look, I think one of the really interesting parts of this draft right now is that we are talking about a quadrant of teams. Every single one of them, from San Francisco, Tampa, Denver, and Atlanta, they not only want to trade, I believe they're going to try to be active to trade. Because I think Thomas Dimitroff badly wants to go up and get one of these 2 corners. The question is, I have to look at this, but right now Thomas Dimitroff picks at 16, 47, and 78. Those are his first 3 picks in this draft. Mm-hmm. So, if he wants to go get a corner, he'd certainly have to give a second-round pick and then probably something else. Is that going to be worth it? I just decided it wasn't worth it, Paul, and I had him stay here and get the edge rusher.
Yep, Caleb Chase, defensive end, LSU. The sense of urgency between Thomas Dimitroff and Dan Quinn, the team played really well for them at the end of last year. But this is a pick. If they can't trade up and get the corner, this pick needs to go for that duo.
I think it does too. I think, look, they got Dante Fowler in free agency, and I think, if and when the NFL plays football this fall, those two guys are going to have to come through in a big way. I'm talking, 18 sacks between them. They're going to have to come through in a big way because, look, their secondary is not very good. And in my opinion, I think that's one of the reasons why you make a pick like this, because that you're covering up for weaknesses on the back end.
There you go. Next four, we have America's team, and then three teams making their second of two picks in the first round. So the Cowboys at 17, safety out of Alabama, Xavier McKinney. Dolphins at 18. Remember, back in the first, they traded from 5 to 3 to get Justin Herbert. Now they get A.J. Epinesa, defensive end, Iowa. Raiders, C.D. Lamb earlier. Now the corner, Christian Fulton from LSU. And the Jaguars' second pick, wide receiver Justin Jefferson, LSU. Hey, Cowboys at 17. I like this one here, Peter, because I think this is a scenario they may very well be facing with their needs and the way this draft falls. Do we take our number one safety, or do we take the number one center, which they also need?
Look, I don't know. There's a lot of people out there who think that the Cowboys somehow, some way are going to come out of the top 40 or so in this draft with one of the two centers in this, one of the top two centers. And so I think there's a very good chance they could move here. But I gave them the best safety in the crop because they have a big need at safety, Paul.
Big time need. And just anecdotally, Chris Sims, who I do a podcast with last week, he also had him taken to safety. He had him taken Winfield out of Minnesota. But the point is the same. They could have their pick of the very best one. Dolphins at 18. Why Epinesa out of Iowa?
This again is a little bit of a dart throw. I think that Miami is looking and has been looking for a Cam Wake type guy, a building block pass rusher. This came down to Epinesa or the Penn State kid whose name I can never pronounce. But I may have to pronounce him later in this draft.
Yes, you do. Yep.
So, but it came down to one of those two guys, and I think the fact that the people who I talk to just like Epinesa a little bit better. But I think that Miami really wants to address that need with one of the 3 first-round picks.
They were last in scoring defense last year, so that pick makes a lot of sense. And I will say Yetur Gross-Matos for you later in the draft. You can just keep calling him the Penn State guy. You just talk about the analysis to stick with that. Okay, 19 Raiders at 12. They got C.D. Lamb, the wide receiver. How about the fit Christian Fulton, cornerback LSU?
Look, I tried to pick a player here who, in my opinion, really fits Mike Mayock. So Mike Mayock likes really competitive guys who've played at the highest level of college football because he believes that, he would much rather have a guy who's been playing with great expectations in college football and step into the NFL, and it's not going to be a big change for him. Look at all the players he has gotten from the southeastern part of the United States. Look at what he did last year and look at what he did this year. I think, what, by the way, one of the guys that Mike Mayock is most excited about is Jonathan Abram, who he thinks is going to be a latter-day Jack Tatum. Mm-hmm. And so, so I just try to read sort of the tea leaves, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was A.J. Terrell, the corner from Clemson either.
Yep.
But I just view that Mike Mayock loves big players from big programs. The interesting thing about Fulton is that there are those, including Pro Football Focus, to give them a plug. They think that Christian Fulton's better than C.J. Henderson. I don't think many people in the NFL believe that, but they think that. And I just think this is the kind of player with his pedigree who Mayock's going to like.
You mentioned Mike there a few times, and to me, Peter, he is kind of the poster child GM for what's happening right now with the challenge they face without being able to spend the final finishing touches with these kids. Because I've known Mike for years, and the number one thing he wants is to spend time with somebody and get a feeling that they love the grind of it. They love football. They love the work of it, and they're going to make themselves a better player than what they are right now. And how do you do that? How do you get that kind of conviction with a first-round pick when, like, I'm just looking at you right now. This is how he's judging these players on his iPad as well. And I think it's a massive challenge for GMs who really value that one-on-one interaction and the intangible feeling.
I agree too, but I trust Mike Mayock a little bit more in this regard because Mike Mayock has spent his life before he got into the NFL at, he watched every play for 2 years of Cleveland Furrow, and Mike is going to be very comfortable with the picks that he makes because he knows that he's done the homework. And again, look, everybody wants to meet the guys and all that, but I've also had scouts tell me it's not so bad that we have to pick them on film alone either.
Right. A couple things about the Jaguars, Peter, at 20 going wide receiver Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, I guess here's the way I look at this. Justin Jefferson is a beloved player in this draft, almost as much as the top three guys. He doesn't have all the tools that they have, but do you know what NFL people love about Justin Jefferson? If you tell him to run a 13-yard out, it's not going to be 13 and a quarter. It's going to be 13. And there is a great respect for his attention to the mechanics of the position and the exactness of the position. So he's a well-admired guy in the NFL.
Next four in the draft here in the first round, Peter, they also started wide receiver. The Eagles addressing a massive need, Henry Ruggs, wide receiver, Alabama. Vikings, first of two first-round picks, Trayvon Diggs, cornerback, Alabama. And the Patriots and 49ers work a trade at 23. The Niners get Josh Jones, offensive tackle, Houston. You talked about him earlier. Saints at 24, cornerback, A.J. Terrell. The Eagles at 21, Doug Peterson getting a Tyreek Hill-type player, and he watches his old boss, Andy Reid, what he does with Hill in Kansas City. I think this is the perfect fit.
And, obviously Henry Ruggs is an accomplished player. He is loved by a lot of people in this draft. And he's a guy who, like, I think as much as it may not make sense to a lot of people, like if anyway he got down to the mid-20s, I think the Saints would be happy to have him because they don't really have that guy right now, But here's the way I look at this. Look, this is more information-based than maybe fit-based. And two people who I really have respect for said to me in different ways, Henry Ruggs is not getting past the Eagles. That's why I gave them to him to them. I wouldn't be surprised if they picked any wide receiver here, but I think if Ruggs is here, my gut feeling is the Eagles would take him.
I also wouldn't be surprised if he goes higher than that, as
right.
He would be the fastest player on the field in any game, or certainly in a high percentage of them. Vikings at 22, Trayvon Diggs. They just couldn't live without a Diggs on the roster, Peter, huh?
Look, I think they're going to take a corner. They have to have a corner. Their cornerback crop has just been pillaged now, and all they have left is Hughes. And to me, I look at their position right now, and I kind of think that I think they'll take a corner and a wide receiver here unless they trade out. And there's a lot of people in the league, who really think that Trayvon Diggs, his competitiveness, his feistiness, he really fits Mike Zimmer. But obviously, you're going to have to ask yourself this question. Do you want a Diggs on the roster? And I really don't know if they're going to want that.
Yeah, well, the physicality of this Diggs stands out to a lot of GMs, so Rick Spielman wouldn't be questioned too much if he took him at 22. 49ers at 23, another offensive tackle, Josh Jones, who you earlier spoke about and how much you like him.
Look, I think the interesting part of this is, this is the most experienced, first-round tackle prospect in this draft. I mean, how many guys leave college football with having started 45 games at left tackle? And so to me, I think one of the things about the 49ers is if Joe Staley, who may play this year, but who may not, if he doesn't come in, they did well last year without Staley and McGlinchey, okay? But I think that one of the things that they want to make sure that they have is a long-term athletic tackle who's going to protect Garoppolo's blind side. That's what this pick is about.
The 49ers late last year had the game of the regular season against the Saints. 24, we see New Orleans not going quarterback, which some people speculated, or wide receiver. You have him with the Clemson cornerback, A.J. Terrell.
Look, if you're playing for a national championship contender and you've started 30 straight games there, and even though you've had some hiccups, I think the competitiveness, as one coach who's interested in him, but who picks earlier than New Orleans says, when we were just going over, because this is a coach who wants a cornerback in this draft, he goes, the guy who I like personally and physically the most in this draft is the Clemson corner, because all he cares about is being great. He listens to coaching. He takes coaching. He wants to get better. And in my opinion, if you add him to a defensive back room with Marshawn Lattimore in it, who's that kind of person, and also to Malcolm Jenkins, who, to my way of thinking, is kind of the Ed Reed of his generation in terms of being a Pied Piper for a secondary. That was a great job by the Saints getting Malcolm Jenkins back for a year or two. He's going to leave an indelible mark on that group, and I think he would leave an indelible mark on A.J. Terrell as well.
Now, the way he competed in the national title game against LSU after getting beat on a couple of big plays everybody saw, I know, really got the admiration and respect of a lot of the evaluators as they watched that game more. Next group of four here, Peter, begins with the Vikings at 25. Speaking of Clemson, T. Higgins, wide receiver. Dolphins with their third pick, offensive tackle again, Austin Jackson out of USC. Seahawks, here's the name, Peter, Yetur Gross-Matos, edge, Penn State. And the Ravens at 28, Kenneth Murray, linebacker, Oklahoma. Let's keep it right there with the Ravens. Hey, there's a certain amount of luck into getting good players in the draft, but this isn't just good fortune. What is it about Baltimore and their scouting staff that allows them to end up in situations like this where they get wonderful players time after time?
Well, I wrote a little bit about this lower in the column today. I wrote about how I don't know how the first 2 years for Baltimore under Eric DeCosta, after the retirement of Ozzie Newsome, who still is active in the organization, but DeCosta now is the man. And I talked about how, Eric DeCosta basically traded Hayden Hurst, and he got out of that trade Coleus Campbell and the 55th player in this draft. So Eric DeCosta might have gotten, let's say, Coleus Campbell, who last year was the best 3-4 defensive end in football, according to Pro Football Focus. He's got maybe 2 years left. So he gets Coleus Campbell, and he gets maybe a long-term starter at wide receiver, because there are going to be some excellent ones left there at 55. So to me, people could say, boy, they got lucky there. Well, you make your own luck in this business. And in my opinion, I don't know. This is low for Murray. I think there's a good chance Murray goes as high as the teens. But I do think that he's one of the players who would fit perfectly in Wink Martindale's defense, and it would be the kind of sideline-to-sideline player that Martindale craves. Even if they have to move up a little bit, I think they would really love to get Kenneth Murray in this draft.
A front seven player who doesn't disrupt the quarterback on the top of his list of qualities might just be around there at that point. Could be a really good pick. Vikings at 25. Basically here, Peter, they swap out Stephon Diggs for T. Higgins, rookie wide receiver Clemson.
The reason that T. Higgins is here is because, people think he's slow. And look, 4.58 or whatever that he runs, that's not a good time for a wide receiver. But this guy is Plexico Burress in terms of a big-bodied guy who's going to get a little stronger. He only weighs like 215, and he's going to get stronger. He's almost 6'4", and in my opinion, I see the speed, but then I see, hey, wait a second. He averaged 18 yards a catch in his career. And so to me, that tells me he's got very good run after the catch instincts. I think he'd be great in Minnesota's offense with Kirk Cousins.
Miami 26, offensive tackle from USC, Austin Jackson. I think this is a very real scenario teams that want an offensive tackle in the draft are going to face. Yes, we need it, but the sixth best one on our board, is he worth this pick?
Well, in my opinion, Miami wouldn't mind trading here. I've heard that they, like several other teams, like Ezra Cleveland, and maybe you get him at 35, let's say. But this is not a position that Miami can fool around with. Whether it's Austin Jackson, Ezra Cleveland, Isaiah Wilson, they need a tackle who they believe can start for them very soon. And I gave him Austin Jackson. He's done it at a high level. And he's a basketball type guy with his feet. So I think he'd be a good fit there.
Protects the investment that you had them trading up for in the first round from 5 to 3 to take quarterback Justin Herbert, Oregon. Seahawks at 27, Yetur Gross-Matos, defensive end, Penn State. What are the chances that John Schneider actually stays put and makes his pick?
I was really trying to find somebody to trade with here, but I just couldn't. I couldn't find anybody. And that's why, to me, I had him take Gross-Matos, because if you look at their team right now, Schneider is not going to – I don't think he's going to cave to Jadeveon Clowney. I think that he's got a number in mind. I don't know what it is, 14, 15 million. And I think he's not going to cave to Everson Griffin either. But one of those two guys, I've thought all along, is going to end up in Seattle, as their edge rusher that they really need. But, again, they have not had a really good young, developmental guy. I mean, they had Frank Clark, but they got rid of him. And I think they really would like to take a guy, if they can, somewhere in this draft. But, again, as I say, John Schneider's traded down the last 8 years with his first-round pick. I'm sure – it's very likely he's going to do it again. I just couldn't find a good candidate to move up.
Final block of 4, Peter, begins with Tennessee at 29, taking the 7th offensive tackle in this draft, Isaiah Wilson out of Georgia. The Packers love this pick. At 30, Michael Pittman, wide receiver, USC. Come back to that in a moment. Cowboys, via a trade with the Niners at 31. Now they get the center, Ruiz, out of Michigan. And the final pick, the Super Bowl champs, go corner, something they need quite a bit, Jeff Gladney, TCU. Green Bay at 30, taking a wide receiver. Do you know how many first-round wideouts they've given to Aaron Rodgers since 2005, Peter?
How many?
0.
Well, that's the Ted Thompson way. That was,
yeah.
We'll find a wide receiver. And in this draft, I could see him saying the exact same thing. Obviously Ted Thompson retired, but I could see him doing the exact same thing. With Gutekunst making that call. But I think the biggest thing that I look at in this block is I start to look at teams moving up from the second round into the first. And there are a lot of teams that either are comfortable where they are, Cincinnati for one at 33, Indianapolis for another at 34, and I don't think you're going to see Detroit at 35 moving up either. So it was hard, and Dave Gettleman it's just not his way. He's at 36. So I couldn't really find a team, to move up to with the exception of Dallas to move up for the Michigan center, Cesar Ruiz. So I as much as it's unlikely that it's going to happen, I kind of see teams, staying put here late in the round.
29, Tennessee, Isiah Wilson, offensive tackle, Georgia. What did you like about putting him in that spot?
To me, he's basically, the kind of right tackle, and who is also, needs a lot of training. But the one thing that you keep hearing about him, feisty, angry. I mean, he seems to fit the John Robinson, Mike Vrabel, very competitive, plays with a little chip on his shoulder kind of guy, who might be able to step in and play, but he might also take a year of grooming. But I think long-term he'd be a smart pick for Tennessee.
Final pick here in the first, Peter. What led you to the Chiefs taking cornerback Jeff Gladney out of TCU?
To me, I think when I look at Kansas City, as I say, the craziest rumor I heard all weekend was that if Henry Ruggs gets into the 20s, the Chiefs might trade for him or try to move up to trade for him, which seems insane because they've got every sub 4.3 guy in recent NFL history. But, I don't think that'll happen. And I just look at them trying to address a gigantic need on their team. They need a young building block cornerback. And this guy is extremely competitive. And I think he's not going to get intimidated. He'll go with Patrick Mahomes in practice. That's what one guy who really likes Gladney said, you just watch him. He said, within a week, Patrick Mahomes is going to hate him because, he'll be talking or he'll be just really competitive in practice. So, look, I don't know that they're going to pick Gladney, but it's in a position of huge need for Kansas City, and I thought the fit was good.
One name that didn't show up, and we're now done with all 32 picks, Peter, Jordan Love, quarterback, Utah State. How much thought did you give to placing him somewhere in this first round?
I asked everybody, what do you think of Jordan Love? I get not a lot of love for Jordan Love, and that is he very well might get picked, but I looked into some of the usual suspects where I'd have teams match to him, and I just couldn't find much evidence that there was a match for Jordan Love low in this round. Now, maybe somebody, trades into Seattle's pick and takes Jordan Love, who's there midway through the second round. I don't know. Somebody who thinks that he might get chest jumped for him, but I just couldn't find one. And again, there may be one out there. I couldn't find him.
And finally, who's the best player that didn't make this list of the top 32?
I'm not saying I'm heartsick that I didn't put him in the first round, but I think Zach Bond is going to go in the first round. He's a linebacker from Wisconsin. He was as disruptive, but just in a different way. As disruptive, really, as Chase Young was for Ohio State last year. That's what a lot of scouts think. And obviously, Chase Young is a generational pass rusher. But, I mean, just think, you play at a pretty good level of football, and 2 to 3 times every game, you're getting either a sack or a tackle for loss. I mean, that's incredible. 32 of those in his time at Wisconsin. I think one of the things that he did was because he walked into Madison as a quarterback, and I think he basically made the impression on his team of a guy who just wants it so bad and will not be denied. And, somebody compared his attitude, not his play, but his attitude to Ray Lewis. Like, I'm gonna either be the best or I'll die trying. And so right. I'm still moaning about, I wish there was a 33rd pick. I would have just put Zach Bond there.
So, Peter, that's the first round. I know it was painful putting it together, but that wasn't so bad.
It wasn't bad. And look, painful. Look, last year I had 9 players picked by the right team in the round. And that is probably the best I've ever done. I'd be happy this year if I had 6. I'd be euphoric if I had 7 or 8. But it's a hard year to pick it. So anyway, we'll see what happens. It's just a lot of fun to talk about.
Where are you going to be draft night?
Be sitting right here in my apartment in Brooklyn, New York, socially distancing myself from everybody in my building, watching the draft, and hopefully having a little bit of insider access to a team or two to just describe what the draft was like.
Why the Wake Forest T-shirt before I let you go here?
I don't have any reason. I was in Winston-Salem last summer, and I had never been on the campus, and I just went to the bookstore while I was there, and I was wowed by the campus. It's utterly beautiful, and that's why. And it was on top of the shirts in my drawer this morning.
That's usually a very good reason why it's the first round pick of any given day. Hey, Peter, that was fun. Appreciate all the work you put into it and sharing your thoughts behind all the picks as well. So thank you very much.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks so much for doing this, Paul. Really enjoyed it. And thanks to everybody for listening to this special edition of the Peter King Podcast.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.